Welcome, I'm Julia.
And I am Marta.
And this is LateMode, a podcast in search of the zeitgeist. Through a series of conversations, we explore the fragmented and hyper-connected modes of our current times.
Hello there. Welcome on the third episode of LateMode. This is Marta, and today I will be inviting my friend David to speak with me about strategies for caring about heritage. Whether it is your personal heritage or something you've encountered in your studies, how to make sure to treat things with the right carefulness, humility, and care. David is a student at the Vrije Universiteit here in Amsterdam, currently about to graduate from a BA in History with a very interesting thesis he will tell us something about. He is one of the top 3 winning members of the chess club I organize every week, and a person whose critical sense and kindness I admire deeply. Together, we will be talking about our personal experiences with heritage in our daily lives and in our studies, but also the positions that we felt like we had to negotiate in order to come to a better relationship with our own heritage. How do we allow people to position us, and how to position ourselves differently vis-à-vis our heritage, so that we may care for ourselves while caring for heritage. Thank you for listening in. Hope you will enjoy. Today we are dealing with episode number 3, and to speak with me is a dear friend, David Grantsaan, which in Dutch you pronounce Grantsaan, but it's a bit ridiculous when I do it. David, I'm really thankful to you for making time to be here this morning, because it is now 10:30 a.m. in Amsterdam, which is not the most decent of times to talk to everyone about care, which is going to be the topic of today's podcast, suggested by our latest podcast guest, Yeva. Thank you, Yeva. And I would like to introduce my dear friend David, who stepped in to help me out last night as we played chess. And I received an email saying that my podcast guest was feeling ill. So, David, would you like to introduce yourself, first of all, to our listeners?
Yes, thank you. I'm David, and I play chess with Marta. And last night she freaked out so much that she lost the game.
I did lose the game.
And then I study history. Let's start there. I'm a history student. I'm 22. I moved to Amsterdam 2 years ago from a smaller town in the Netherlands. And I like to play basketball and also chess. And that's how I met Marta.
Yes, David and I are part of the same chess club for a year now, we realized. We probably wouldn't have ended up having such deep conversations if we weren't stuck at a board trying to get the best of each other and distracting the opponent. And the reason that with the topic of care in my mind, I thought David would be a great replacement for this podcast and somebody with whom I can have a conversation that I enjoy and that maybe somebody else could also enjoy, is that we tend to speak about very interesting stuff. Because of David's background in history and my own studies in the humanities at large, we often ended up discussing the topic of heritage in interesting and multifaceted ways. So then I asked David, do you think that the conversations we've had so far about heritage could somehow form the basis of a podcast episode? And he said, that's a bit of a stretch.
That is what I said.
But then we started thinking about it together, and we did find some things that might be interesting to discuss about heritage and caring about heritage. So today we're going to try to give you our best selection of conversations on heritage from the perspective of two 20-somethings who live in the broader city of Amsterdam in an anti-crack student housing at the edge of this enlarging city. What do we think about heritage? How do we relate to our different heritages? And how do we bring that into our daily practice, our studies, and our strategies of care? So, David, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think about heritage?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind why I realized later that evening that caring might be an appropriate subject relating to heritage is that a few weeks ago, talking to my thesis advisor, we spoke about the topic of my thesis being the abolition of slavery. And I told her, I don't care about the whole slavery subject. She looked at me horrified because, of course, it's her field and we were supposed to write a thesis about it. And she had asked me, like, why do you want to write this? And I was like, I don't care. And then I started thinking about why. Why did I get to a point where I was writing my thesis about a subject that I claimed not to care about?
That is an important word, no? Claim.
Yes, because I think I do care about the slavery subject. And I also, because I do think it's a part of my heritage and also a part of the heritage of my country, the Netherlands as a whole. And I think heritage is important. I do care about it. But how did I get to the point where I said I don't care? And I think that also kind of related to heritage because I grew up in a small town in the Netherlands. And as the only person of color in that small town, or often finding myself in contexts where I was the only person of color, people would be reminded of the colonial heritage of the Netherlands by my presence there. And they'd ask me all sorts of questions. How do you feel about Black Pete? How do you feel about slavery? Are you one of those critical Black people, those angry Black people? And I used to be somewhat intimidated by the question because there's a group of people staring at me and I feel like they will not accept me if I don't give the right answer here, if I'm too critical or too angry or one of those Black people. So I come out saying I don't care about Black Pete or I don't care about slavery. I don't care. But I did care and I have all sorts of ideas about it. And that's kind of the start of me saying I don't care. Saying I didn't care was also quite liberating for me because I didn't know how to relate myself to my Surinamese heritage. I didn't feel very connected to it in the small town that I lived in. People are asking me all of these questions about this particular heritage, the Black side of my family, the Surinamese side. My father is Surinamese and my mother is Dutch. And they were asking me all sorts of questions, and I did not know the answer to it. Like, how am I supposed to behave? Because apparently I am a Black person. And saying I don't care about this made me feel like I could be anything. And I could start deciding again what I do care about. And it turns out I do care about the whole slavery subject and the heritage subject. But it was saying I don't care at first that got me to the place where I could care again.
There's something really beautiful in that, I think, in this learning to care again.
Yes. And I feel like over time, from when I was younger to now, that the times or the zeitgeist, as you might say, has really changed in that other people have started caring. There has been a lot of protest around the issue of Black Pete and discrimination and racism in the Netherlands and questions of colonial history. And now I feel like, whereas the questions were closed questions at first, now when I get questions, they are more open and people are genuinely caring about my perspective more. And that's also contributed to me caring more again.
And when you say caring more again, in what parts of your daily life do you see that manifesting? Is it something that you can see in your studies or in the conversations you're ready to have or in the questions you yourself pose to your own heritage, sort of learning about it or asking your family about it? Or how are you learning to care for this heritage now that you realized again that you do care?
I think part of it is that I can care about a lot of things. I can find myself, especially in history, because it's my interest, I can find myself caring about medieval Burgundians. I can find myself caring about 1980s design studios. And I can find myself caring about the abolition of slavery. And
when you talk to me about these things, I feel passionate about it. And I didn't know you were interested in 1980s design studios. So now I'm looking so much forward to talk about that with you and learn more. And there's a beauty in that, in the realization that heritage and caring about heritage is a way to impact the present directly, and that making different choices in your daily life about what you are interested in and what you pursue, for example, in your studies or in conversations, is a direct result of how you engage with your heritage. We have discussed together before what about terms like heritage and archive is interesting to us both. And mainly we were both focused about the present. It's not so much the past that is interesting about these terms and these spaces of discourse, but it is their role in the present and how we use them nowadays. So I went to this writing school when I was younger to learn how to write. And one of the things they taught us there was talk about what you know. But this really froze me. I had a writing block that lasted for years because I realized I don't really know anything. And this sort of like inability to find something to talk about, this kind of refusal of what I did know, because I did know that I came from southern Italy. I did know about my personal experience as a woman, as a daughter. There were things I knew, but I was refusing them because some of them were difficult to me, some of them I didn't understand. And it was this refusal of them that then later enabled me to approach them differently and start finding their propulsion to go into completely different topics and find an interest there.
I think that's also, in a way, it's how I felt this morning or last night when you asked me to come on your podcast, because I felt unqualified to speak on caring about heritage, because I don't feel qualified to speak about it. And I also think that this sense of humility is an important thing to have when you talk about heritage, whether it's you and your Italian heritage or me and my heritage. I remember one of the first courses we had during a seminar, the teacher was distributing topics. And one of the topics was related to slavery in Suriname. And me and this white Dutch student both raised our hands. And it kind of went without saying, or no one ever said anything. Everyone just kind of looked up and they assigned me the topic. I felt like at that point, I don't know why they assigned me the topic. Well, I do kind of know, but being asked these questions can almost make me feel like people look at me as an authority on the subject, which I am not, because it's part of my heritage, but it's also not my history. I'm quite far removed from it in some ways, because I grew up in a small Dutch town with 2 university-educated parents in a middle-class household. I'm by no means from a forced labor background. So in that sense, I also think it's important to approach these subjects with humility. And I think that's also something we spoke about when you told me about your work about sharecropping and your family heritage regarding to that.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful that you would bring this in right now, because it's such an important topic, I think, whenever we talk about heritage, and it's one of the most interesting conversations that I've had relating to this. I've had it with you, because we could both empathize with each other on this point of view that, of course, this is the history of my family. This is, of course, my heritage. But at the same time, I need to show the humility and the self-reflectiveness of saying, I have an incredibly privileged experience, right? So it's something like, I understand that this is something that is part of what makes up the suitcase of my background, but it's also not something that I feel comfortable parading around. Something you told me, and I'm paraphrasing, so I hope I don't misquote you, was, I understand that this is important and that this is interesting and it's a work that needs to be done, but I am not going to use it to just because it's something that needs to be done. It doesn't mean I have to do it. And it's something that I often think about with my research, which is based on sharecropping, which is part of the heritage of my family. I always try to ask myself, is this something that is for me to study? And there's many parts of my research, stuff I can be interested in, and stuff, well, I'm interested in most of it, but stuff that I can speak about, and stuff that sometimes I'm like, maybe I shouldn't speak about this. Maybe this is not something that should be made transparent, that should be brought into my research for others to find, use, understand. There's some stuff that needs to stay opaque sometimes. And sometimes you don't feel like you're the best person to speak about it. And some other times you feel like, maybe nobody is the best person to speak about, and I have a duty towards this topic in a way. And this is also something we discussed, like how to balance the feeling of duty towards your heritage and humility in relation to your heritage. How do I stay humble and speak about this? Or how do I stay caring and responsible but not speak about this?
Yeah, definitely. I think what the word that you used, parading, I think that's very interesting, because that is one of the reasons that I told my thesis supervisor that I did not care. I felt like I was pigeonholing myself into a space where I knew, because I had grown up in an environment where I was the black guy in the room. So people could come to me with their questions, like, is it true what they say about black men? How do you feel about black Pete? Like all of these questions. And I felt like in academia, there's a limited amount of there's another Surinamese guy in my group, in the history group, like one other guy. So I felt like I could do this in academia too, maybe, like be this person. I'll just write about the slave trade and slavery, and I'll be that historian, and I'm black, so it's marketable, and I can parade it around, even though I feel like I have other interests. And I also feel kind of uncomfortable in this position. And I think that was interesting what you said, like parading it around. And I didn't want to parade around with it. I wanted to research it if it interests me, and I want to approach it with care. And I don't want it to use it as a tool to like try to further maybe an academic career in some sense. Because I had thought about it. Maybe that is a way to get to speak at places, get to write about things, to just become that guy.
I think it's a very interesting perspective to think about what other people expect you to care about based on your identity and your position in the world, and reflect on that and try to find a form of self-care in that, to discern what you care about, what you're being asked to care about, what you're expected to care about, and what you end up refusing to care about because it is so adamant that you should. Because this pigeonholing you were talking about is a very sensitive topic in academia today, because in general, to get funds, because of the funding system and how it's made, you will inevitably have to pigeonhole yourself into something. And the conversation I've been having with a lot of people who are interested in academia, and in that sense, which I do think it's a bit of a general topic that we all hover around, is to what extent am I ready to exploit things about my identity to get where I want to get? To what extent will I make my heritage, my sexuality, my gender, my, I don't know, interest in knitting, to what extent will I make these things marketable? I organized this artistic research knitting club with a friend, Lisa Prince, who is also an artist, who is also a knitter. And we've often talked with her about how knitting for her is something very personal and something that helps her to wind down. It's something intimate and beautiful, and that she's often felt like she doesn't know if that is something she wants to profit from in academia or in her artistic career, that it feels like you're exploiting.
I did think about like does my work as someone who has this Black Dutch heritage have to be related to that? Does it have to be anti-racist? Does it have to be woke or any of those things? How do I need to position myself here? And then I realized that I could write a lot of essays on anti-racism in historical contexts. That'd be great. Very interesting stuff to do. But what if I am the only Black guy in the room who knows anything about 80s design studios? Or what if I am the Black guy who somehow knows a lot about medieval Burgundy? Or I'm currently trying to learn Russian via Duolingo. What if I am the Black guy who knows a word or two in Russian? Doesn't that do more than me writing about anti-racism in theory? So that's kind of where I also learned or figured out for myself that being that Black guy in the space can also be a very good way of, I guess, combating certain boxes that people like to put you in.
So in the end, I think an interesting thought is that to care about heritage, in specific when it's your heritage, it's mainly to care about you. So this idea that heritage always does play out in the present, and it is a thing of the present, because if you do not care about you, if you put yourself in an uncomfortable position to speak from for you, but that is comfortable for everybody else to hear you from, you are not really respecting the heritage that has brought you there. That to care for this interest, for this heritage, for this identity is also not to exploit it, but also not to silence it. So striking this balance in between poles is a very difficult job, probably a lifelong job. And I think there's nothing more valuable than hearing firsthand account of somebody who's just trying, moving back and forth, So I don't think there would be anybody more qualified than you to have this conversation with me today. Before we start rounding up, there is one thing that I need to ask of you. As you know, this podcast is based on the principle that every guest leaves a ruin of the conversation behind them. So a topic that came to mind maybe while we were speaking or while they thought about the ethos of this podcast being a way to collect experiences from all parts of life and all around the place of people living right now. If you think about this, and if you think about topics that come up daily in your daily life that you feel are important, that you feel personally engaged with, or that somehow when you look around in the world, you're like, oh, wow, this is something I see a lot, a kind of synchronicity I'm noticing. Is there a topic that comes to mind in that sense that you think it might be interesting for us to discuss with our next guest?
A topic that I was thinking about is time pressure, in the sense that a lot of people are rushing around. There's a lot of e-bikes in Amsterdam. There's a lot of meal deliverers. Everyone wants their food at home now. There's 10 minutes or less for your groceries. And in career-wise, you need to get everything figured out by the time you're 27, maybe.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of time pressure and there's a lot of rushing around.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, this 27 thing is super interesting. I was talking with a classmate recently, and she mentioned how you, as a European youth, and this is for all you folks out there, if you have a passion for cinema as a European youth, up until the age of 27, you can apply to visit the Festival de Cannes for free. We found this out because a classmate was missing. And where is our classmate? Oh, he's at the Festival de Cannes. And everybody was like, excuse you, what? And it turned out that there's this fund by which they just give you a free ticket for the Festival de Cannes. And then we started thinking, because some of my classmates are more than 27 years old, why 27? Like, what happens after 27? Am I dead? Am I supposed to like not be interested in movies anymore? Am I not considered youth anymore? So I definitely vibe with this because a lot of people in the class started feeling very anxious about this, sort of like, oh my God, I am 27 and there's already possibilities that are not accessible to me anymore. So I think time pressure is a great, great topic. Thank you very much for that. I'm really happy that we got to discuss this together, because I think you brought in so many interesting points, and I am very grateful to you for sharing personal stories about your thesis and about what it means to grow up as a Black man in a small Dutch village where everybody is asking you to basically give them your opinion about things and feeling unqualified, even though you're obviously, and this is something that I meant to tell you before as well, I just didn't want to interrupt, but like, you're obviously qualified to speak on this silly podcast. I'm very grateful that you're here. And I think that, considering your position, the things we talked about are something that I couldn't imagine wanting anybody else's opinion more on. Like, I don't need a heritage studies scholar to talk to me about what it means to live your heritage every day, you know, and like being asked to perform according to the boxes in which people place that heritage. You have a very first-hand experience of this, and I think it couldn't be more interesting than to hear about another normal person who is also my age, who is also a student, who is also going through the process of, oh, do I want an academic career? And what will that mean? And what will that require of me? Sort of like hearing somebody else struggling, making it in a way, because in the end, you did find a resolution to your thesis conundrum. You did realize that, of course, you care about this. I hope your supervisor feels a bit more secure about your interest in her lifelong work. And I also hope that you're enjoying the process of writing your thesis in the end.
I definitely am enjoying writing my thesis in the end. And, well, thank you for saying that I'm qualified to talk about this.
Of course you are. You don't need me to say it.
Yeah, it just felt really good to talk about this with you. And I don't know, even just talking about it made me realize new things maybe that I need to think about some more. That saying I care or I do not care really is a key way for me relating myself to my heritage and how my heritage influences my identity and how people perceive me. That the way that my personal heritage relates to the heritage of the Netherlands and the discussions that are happening here is really impacting the way that people perceive me and the things that they expect me to talk about, or that they look for me to talk about, or the things that I might want to talk about if I want to find a market for the things I have to say. And I don't know. I just want to be very careful, I guess, in trying to navigate that. And I think that's what I have been doing. So,
yes. And it makes me very happy to hear you say this. I am glad that this was not just a gift you did to me of your time this morning, but that it was also something that you could get interesting thought points out of. That is the best I could have hoped for. And I think that with this statement, you leave us on a very good note, that it is always important, no matter how confident you are in speaking about a topic, that you're careful in navigating it for yourself and for others. Because most of, carefulness doesn't have to come to a stalemate where you feel paralyzed, where you feel like you cannot speak about something because you're afraid of the way that you're relating to it. Is my position good enough to speak about this? Is it not? If you're doing it with humility, with care, and with carefulness, then you're probably doing all right, love. Just, go for it. If you have talked to yourself and you have decided, I do care, then go find out. You don't have to market it afterwards. You don't have to do anything about it. Maybe you'll just end up having a non-recorded conversation with a friend, and that can still be valuable enough. We decided to record this conversation for you today, and we hope it will be valuable to you as well.
Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If you want to dive deeper into the show, don't forget to check the podcast description for extra resources, contact information, and a sign-up form for our newsletter. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, take care.